and welcome to Frame and Reference. I'm your host, Kenny McMillan, and you're listening to episode 89 with Curren Sheldon, DP of the documentary King Cole, which recently premiered at Sundance. Enjoy.
Yeah, have you been watching anything interesting lately?
I haven't really. So about this time last year, and nothing against them because there's so many high quality television shows. But my wife and I kind of just said, you know what, let's not watch TV for a year. It seemed like there were so many good TV shows, and you get kind of stuck in that endless loop, right, of watching like what is basically, I think, a 10-hour movie instead of just watching like a great film. And so we've really started focusing on like, let's just watch films, let's not spend so much time in front of just watching, TVs and getting sucked into the cliffhangers and it's like a pulp novel in a lot of ways. So no, I've sort of just focused on reading more and watching films rather than watching TV. But even film wise, we have an 18-month-old, so he's really torn into my sitting around and watch TV time, and movie time. But it was a very light year for watching stuff for me, actually.
I tend to, I can't see, my problem is maybe it is the same problem. I can't get too into television shows unless I'm like incredibly interested. I'm not, like, even Game of Thrones, like I was like, that seems like a lot. I'm not, like, it's cool, but I'm not, like, I think Breaking Bad had me by the throat, but that was like a global phenomenon, but yeah, same. I've been watching mostly films and especially trying to become more film literate, trying to seek out films that, like the whole Criterion collection or whatever, just things that I wouldn't immediately jump for, and trying to kind of self-educate, because it's easy to buy like the, Alfred Hitchcock box set and be like, I'm educated, but
Yeah. No, for sure. My wife, who we're filmmaking partners, she is much more, I know she has an MFA in media art. She studied film. She's gone sort of that deep dive of, film history. And I've done a little bit of that, but it's also something kind of on my list, especially for this year, is, watching the great classics that maybe I've missed my first 37 years. So, that's definitely a big goal for mine as well. Watched quite a few Terrence Malick films at the end of last year, which was nice, especially some of his earlier stuff, which I'd never seen. But
did you?
But yeah, Criterion Collection, that's a good one as well.
Well, that was, I've said this a few times on this podcast, but my pandemic project was this podcast and just buying up tons of Criterion Blu-rays, because I was in a real self-education kick, because I couldn't shoot anything. So I was like, well, I shouldn't say I couldn't. I know you made a whole fucking web series during the pandemic, but I suppose I chose not to. But yeah, spent the time to try to like shore up the old back of the brain knowledge in that way,
No, for sure. Yeah, I think it was obviously a tough time. So much work obviously dried up for everybody, especially in this industry, right? In documentary, you have to get so close to people that it's pretty hard to do when you can't. And so luckily I just had a friend who lived nearby for the series who has done some acting, and she's done some directing, and says like, well, let's just do a bunch of like outdoor, comedic web series. And so that was just like a thing to do for a few months to get through the toughest portion of, not having work and not much to do. So, and it was nice, I haven't done a ton of like just sort of narrative scripted stuff, even if it was skit based, and for comedic value, but, it was a lot of fun just to kind of keep the muscles tuned up.
Yeah. This is kind of like a instantly deeper question than normally to start, but like, I feel like it can be kind of, there can be a negative view of people making like YouTube video, like, oh, if you get success on not just making YouTube videos, because no one will see those, but having a successful YouTube something, let alone trying to make like a career out of it, can be seen as a negative if you're trying to get into more professional workspaces. Did you find that I mean, maybe it wouldn't necessarily happen in the documentary space, but what kind of response did you see from that, positive or negative?
Yeah, I mean, I think the series is definitely not sort of successful enough where I was having tens of thousands of subscribers and was considered a YouTuber, right? It was more just something fun to do for a few months. And Funny or Die published a lot of them. And again, I'm not sure there's a ton of people who I work with on a professional basis who even saw the films, but the people who did, whether it's just, people I've worked with in the past who are Facebook friends or when I would post them, I think everyone was just ready for a little bit of a laugh, right? And sort of to a little bit of, despite all the sort of dark moments and obviously real serious things that were occurring, it's, some levity. It's sort of the weird cultural insanity that we're all going through, right? And it was kind of like making the films of just like having a social distance hangout and sort of the challenges of that. I think allowed a lot of people to just be like, oh, I'm not, everyone else is having these same experiences, right? Like we're all kind of, separated and isolated, but we're all kind of doing the same thing and trying to cope in our own ways. And so I think people appreciated it for that, whether it was just friends or people in the industry, but it definitely wasn't successful enough for people to be like, oh, he's just a YouTuber. And I'd already been, pretty much in the professional film world before that. So I think, more than anything else, just sort of a fun thing for people to have a little smile in their life at the time. But no, it hasn't really come up in the last couple of years since I did it, other than like, hey, you made those funny quarantine life videos. That was funny. So that was pretty much it.
You mentioned that your partner had an MFA in film and whatnot. Did you also like go to film school, or how'd you come to cinematography?
I didn't. I definitely took sort of the roundabout way to kind of what I do now. I studied writing and journalism in college, and I went to grad school for professional writing. And so the first 2 or 3 years after grad school, I actually worked for a travel startup in New York City. And more than anything else, I chose to start doing video for the lifestyle. I love movies. Photography was a bit of a hobby. I just did for fun on my travels, but what I really wanted to do was to have a life that wasn't in a office. Like I was working at a travel startup. There was only 8 of us. Like it was still a very cool place to work. I loved working there, but at the end of the day, I was inside for 9-10 hours a day sitting at a desk, and I just knew that's not how I wanted to live. And so this was early 2010s, 2011, 2012. And, working at a travel startup, my job I was a content manager for a website. I was trying to pull in writing and photos and videos. And I just kind of figured out like, wow, there's, for 2012, I thought there'd be like more good travel videos or travel documentaries that, we could sort of populate the site. And I just couldn't really find them. And so I recruited a buddy and said, let's go make films, like we can save up enough money. We can teach ourselves how to shoot. And then we could just make short documentaries. And so we did. We worked for another 9-10 months. I think we saved up, it seemed like a lot at the time, but maybe $7,000 or $8,000 each, like not a ton of money. And then we just started traveling and said that, hey, every week we'll do one short documentary on a fascinating person that we meet, find, edit it in a week and put it up. And so we created a series called Humanity and did that for 2 or 3 years, and kind of unbeknownst to me, it was sort of our film school, just by doing it. We would go and shoot and be like, man, why does this look bad? Like, why does it look jerky? Like, why is it like, oh, we have to focus on shutter speed. And like, how do you get that blurry background? All these little things that you do when you're trying to figure out how to shoot. And so it was just sort of a kind of an amazing experience where you're always out, always shooting, always in different scenarios. And though I never had in my mind that, I want to be a documentary DP or a DP in general, I was sort of training myself for that, right? Just by being in an incredible amount of different scenarios and sort of tough conditions. So, that's kind of how I came about it. And then, soon after, I started doing video, kind of still training myself in New York before I left for that trip. My wife, who was just a friend of a friend at the time, was the only person I knew who did video. And so I was like, contacting her with my questions about my 60D, like, how do you do this? And how do you do this? And then what does this mean? So that's how we started chatting. And then a couple of years later got married, and we've been working together ever since. And she's kind of one of the main reasons why I do more of the bigger doc stuff now. That's been her passion and sort of her focus in the last decade.
I imagine the sort of journalism background helps the documentary brain, kind of create the story. Because that's one thing that I've always said, that editing makes you a better DP, but certainly writing is kind of the other side of that coin in terms of if one skill set was going to enhance your cinematography.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, I see every time I speak with students or people who are learning. I say, like, what's your biggest tip? I always say, edit your own stuff. That's number one, right? Is like, when you edit your own work, you're the one getting mad at yourself, right? Like when an editor gets mad at you, you don't hear from them, right? They just don't, you don't talk to them. Most editors, they take your footage and they work as a director on whatever it is they're working on. But when you're editing your own stuff, you're like, man, like, why is, like, come on, Curren, like, steady up, like, hold the shot, like, all these different things that you sort of teach yourself to do. But I totally agree that the second part of that is the writing or the journalism or just the shaping of a story, right? It's like, pretty images are interesting to watch for about 45 seconds, right? After that, you have to have a story, you have to have characters, you have to be able to keep people's attention with something that they're emotionally attached to. And it's hard to get emotionally attached to just pretty images. And so I think, journalism, writing, crafting a story, all of that is intertwined with cinematography, intertwined with editing to actually make a piece of work that is either enjoyable to watch or educational, whatever it is that you're trying to get across. So it's definitely the combination of all those factors.
Yeah. Did you end up coming up with obviously at first you were probably thinking of way too many things, but once you got into the groove of it, did you kind of come up with maybe like a formula that you knew was going to make not only a good mini doc about a person, but also your, like, whatever your flavor of that was?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. When we started, we were really focused on sort of more inspirational stories, right? People who were either trying to do things to help others or, just had an interesting story around the world. And so, I think, it's at this point, it's probably a little bit of a, Vimeo staff pick cliche sort of thing, but we had sort of that same, approach where it's kind of, you have those openings with like inspirational quotes and lots of nat sound, and then you sort of drop that and move into like the bulk of the story and the person's backstory before sort of finalizing kind of like what it is they do. And when each film is 3 to 5 minutes, there's definitely sort of a formula kind of how you do that. But it's kind of keep trying different things, and we tried to push ourselves when we were doing our series just to like, well, what if we did split screen, or whether it was technique based or editing based or editing tricks, or maybe what if we told a story with where we actually didn't hear any of the voiceover, right? It was just images and natural sound. And so we definitely tried different things just to see kind of how it would feel and look and sort of what emotions we could to showcase. And so well, yeah, I think there always was a formula, right? Because at the end of the day, we're like, hey, let's not sit around and edit for 4 days of the week. Let's go out and like actually have some fun. So, we definitely try to shoot in a day or two and edit in a day or two. So we'd have a few days in between each video. So that sort of more than anything else dictated, how quickly we did something or what formula we attached to it.
Yeah. With the were you kind of trying to study sort of the cinematic language at all? Like what each shot says about that situation, or was it kind of more just verite, getting the shot and then moving on?
I think I've always, because I was thinking about this the other day of like, even when King Cole, we were at Sundance, people were kind of talking to me about the cinematography, and I think in general I'm just a very intuitive shooter. Like I kind of let myself in the moment and on the shoot day sort of see, and I think that's because of how I learned, right? Just 2 years of traveling all over the world and a bunch of different landscapes and a bunch of different cultures and a bunch of different places, where as soon as I arrive, I'm like, okay, how do I get the best shot for this story? And I've storyboarded, I've done shot lists, I've done all that. And then once I got on location, I'm like, oh no, that the plan I had is actually not as good as the one I come up with right here. Right. And so sometimes that's, once or twice in my life, that's gotten me into a little bit of trouble, but generally I feel, like I can really sort of find the shots that I want to get on, in the moments, once I see kind of all the different places that I am and how the characters are moving and kind of, the way that they're moving through the scene. And so, I think that's one of my strengths. But in terms of like the cinematic language, I think it was all subconscious, like I watch movies, I love movies. And when you're out shooting and you're shooting that much, just shooting every single day, I do pull it in, and you just start realizing like, ooh, this shot like feels good for some reason, right? Like, why does it feel good? And luckily I had, a good friend with me, and so we could sort of discuss those things and kind of come up with not by any means groundbreaking like ways to shoot, right? It's like it's all been done before, it's all been tried, it's all been shown, but sort of discovering it for the first time on your own, right? Sort of as you're teaching yourself how to do the skill, felt like a big moment, felt like a big discovery, even if we were, the 10,000th person to discover it.
Well, it's, it kind of goes, something I've said a bunch on this podcast is like, you can learn the rules, I suppose. There's a base level of knowledge that every cinematographer should have, but at the end of the day, you end up realizing that like feeling is more important. Unless that feeling is bad, like, but if you, if I can't remember who said it, but you get into whatever art form you're in because you have good taste. I think this might have been David Lynch. But if you have good taste and you are someone who's aesthetically minded like that, it's better to trust your feelings on a shot, because that's as my old directing teacher said, the film is just getting the audience to feel the emotion when you want them to feel it. So if you feel it as the DP, they'll feel it as the audience, versus you trying to like shoehorn a rule of thirds or whatever the hell, into a shot.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And as a documentary DP, especially, right, when you don't know when someone's going to say something, when you don't know when the emotion's going to arise, is that you just are always ready for that, right? You're always kind of looking for that. And so you kind of, to some degree, once you have, sort of the basics down, right? Sort of the basic, cinematography tenets that you've learned, and the rules and the things that, can, whether it's a low shot or a high shot or an eye level shot, or, through something, right? Or, dirtying the frame, whatever it might be. Like once you sort of have those and you sort of can naturally do them on the spot, then you're just always looking for emotion. You're listening for emotion. You're listening for kind of what's being said and what's most important. And then sort of the secondary to that is, okay, how's the best way to capture this? And, hopefully to some degree, if you do it enough, that part is so natural that it just clicks, right? You're like, oh no, this person's talking. That person's saying something important. I need to get that now. And when you do that, you can do it in a cinematic way. And I think that's what's kind of, fun about documentary work. Doing some narrative work and fiction work. It's like also a lot of fun to like, you can do it exactly as you want, which is sort of always the frustrating thing with documentary DP work is, you don't always have the opportunity to do the lighting the way you want it, or, shoot in the location you want, or shoot from the exact angle you want. But it does teach you that whatever the person is saying, right, whatever the story is, that is more important than, your idea of a perfect cinematic image, right? Because it's all driven by story, it's all driven by character. And then when you do commercial work or narrative work, you always have that in your mind. It's right, you could do something cool. But instead, what if you actually just like focused on the emotion and the point of the story, and not draw too much attention, right? If you don't need to the cinematography.
Yeah. Well, the other thing too is like having done a decent amount of, I would call it docu-style work. I find that like, especially, for like corporate clients or rush jobs, if it's narrative, like, it's really nice to know that in the back of your head, you've got, I'll just show up. I know where the light's coming from. I'll modify it with one or two and then we'll go. Like, it'll look great. And the more experienced I've gotten as a cinematographer, the more I've realized, like, I used to overlight the shit out of things. And it's like, it really is just like find a window, give it a little wrap, maybe an edge. Yep. Good. Like 9 times out of 10, that looks the most natural and looks the most compelling,
For sure. Yeah, I've done a lot of corporate work and with different hotel companies. And so you're always trying to find, like doing interviews in a master suite. And 9 times out of 10, I just put them in front of a big window, pull the sheer. So it's just this diffuse light, and then just do some negative fill on the other side. And you're like, that looks perfect. Right. You can carry around a bunch of lights and try to light things, but it is sort of an ironic thing that kind of the more equipment you use sometimes, the more fake it looks, right? The more you're trying to make it look realistic or dramatic, kind of the worse off it gets. So I'm a big proponent of sort of the one light with some bouncer fill or whatever it might be, then rather than, trying to do 5 different lights and, put all the different temperatures and kind of make it look a certain way. But that's probably the documentary DP in me. A love for natural light for sure.
Well, and I don't know when I discovered it, but just realizing that negative fill was a thing. I think it's because I learned on 16 millimeter, and they didn't tell us about negative fill because the idea that you would need less light was absurd when you're ISO 200 film. And then we get digital, and I guess only recently. Same thing with old DV. It's still, you needed a ton of light. So the idea of removing light, I think, is not new, but certainly in fashion now. And I don't remember when, but making that discovery of like, I should just carry like a 4x floppy of ultra bounce everywhere if I can fit it in my car, and that'll just solve a lot of problems.
For sure, yeah. Or even one of those collapsible discs with a black side. It's like, just clamp that onto a light stand. You're pretty much good to go for a lot of things. Especially when it comes to sort of corporate and documentary interviews. It's like that can go a long way if you have that.
Dude, the big one. Well, I also used to carry. I had to tear it up for a gig, but I used to just carry a bolted Duvetine that I'd throw on a C stand. I'm nervous that those fold out reflectors, like the black is still kind of reflective.
Yeah,
like I don't many. I want it to be matte. But,
sweet, but just matte and easy.
Yeah, but the thing that I find when doing, like you're saying, like having to film in a suite or whatever, is I got this master, what is it, Roscoe, I think, Lee, maybe it's Lee, like master locations gel pack, which are just these little 8.5 by 11 gels that so I'd go around, because you get into none of these corporate people care about the lights in their ceilings, so none of them match. They're all different color temperatures, and I'm just going around with my color meter and like taping up into the ceiling so they're all the same color.
That's amazing. I love it. Yeah, my number one rule when going into any sort of hotel or sort of corporate-y setting is like, just turn all the lights off, pretty much. Just turn them all off. And then if I need to like bounce something into a ceiling or add my own lights or, just diffuse the sunlight coming through a window, that's always better. So it's pretty much any house or room or place I go in, the first thing I do is turn everything off, and then we'll start from there.
The light I just picked up, if we're gonna get nerdy about it, the light I just picked up that I'm very excited about. I was just telling someone else about this in a different episode, but it's the IntelliTech Mega Light Cloth. Have you seen this?
Oh, I have not. Hold on.
Yeah, they make them in Boulder, I think, or Denver. And it's a 3.5 by 4 foot collapsible LED blanket.
Oh, sweet.
It folds into a 1x1 square, so you can chuck it in your backpack. The ballast is kind of big, but still, you could put it in a backpack. And then it comes with a frame and diffusion and a grid. And so you've basically just got a portable window. And so that's just my key light for everything now, is just bring that little, jam it up. And it's so big that like it doesn't look like a light, and screw a book light or anything like that. It just does the work for you, and it's super accurate.
Oh, that's great. I love that.
Again, I'm the color meter guy.
Yeah. I haven't used them as much as I would like, but last year I got the Light Bridge cine reflectors. Have you ever seen these? Oh yeah, the CRLS. Man, I tried to talk to those guys at Cinegear. Was it Cinegear? Adobe Cinegear, and they were very. I could tell that they have sold enough that they don't need to talk to anyone. Totally. It's true. They're pretty sweet. But I mean, you can stick them on a stand and then just beam a light from anywhere, and hit them. It bounces off and just creates this sort of beautiful, soft light. And what's cool about it is you can, put it pretty darn close to someone, whereas you put a softbox in front of them would still be, pretty harsh. So in tight situations, you can just bounce a light off these things, and it just comes off looking just so soft and pretty with it's just great. But I have not used them as much as I'd like, because I travel so much for work, and when you have, they're coming in a giant case, right? So they're like, of all the things you can bring, it's unfortunately something that often gets left behind on plane trips. But if I do anything locally and stuff, I always pull them out, and they're pretty. But man, I mean, there's so much cool stuff happening with lighting right now that, there's just so much you can do.
Yeah. Well, and thank God the LEDs are getting, the other really good LEDs are the Kino Flow, not the tubes, but just the LED panels that they have. Again, like super accurate. This is the exact conversation I was just having with a different TV, like two quote unquote episodes ago, or yesterday for me. But the cool thing about the Kinos is they have camera LUTs in them. So if you tell the light what camera you're shooting on, it will not create a color outside of that camera's gamut.
Whoa!
So you'll never get that LED like overset. You know, you'll like throw the factory LUT on something, and then like something will pop too hard or whatever. They won't do it. And I was getting 100 TLCI out of these lights on certain settings.
Wow!
So they're
that's cool.
I've been screaming about those for a minute now because like everyone, you know, obviously aperture. Obviously, we've got the sky panels, which unfortunately sky panels are not very accurate. Those don't photometrically are not great. But the Kinos are.
I'll have to message you now with every light purchase I make and just see what your readings are.
So what I did was this was like a couple years ago, but the guy who's developing what was supposed to be a website, and then he's like, I'm going to make it an app. And then I was like, crap, this is too hard. I was going to make it a website again. But I went to Film Tools here in LA and just metered every light on their showroom floor. And then also a bunch of lights that I had owned and stuff. And so I wanted to make I guess someone else is making a comparator. Or at least you could either use it to compare, or you could just look it up basically, but would just show objectively what the, you know, readings are for all of these various lights. Because I thought that'd be useful because, you know, like a light meter or a color meter is $1,800. Yeah. Obviously the readings are going to be, they're going to differ between each unit situation or whatever, but a general idea of like, oh crap, you know, these, like the old apertures used to be awful. Now they're a lot better, but like the original ones were terrible. Godox makes a decent, or Nanlite, actually, there's stuff.
Nanlite, I've got some Nanlites. I like Nanlite and some of the new apertures. That's kind of my go-to kit. You know, obviously affordability is awesome, but also, you know, it's easily to port them around, and you know, just having nice, even just the app connection that some of these guys have is just so useful. Once you like put a light up and you're like, I don't want to bring it back down to change color temp or, you know, change output. And so just having that is, you know, in a lot of ways, that kind of speed is so much more useful to me than like an extra, you know, 1 or 2 score on like a CRI or something, right? So
for sure.
I'm always looking for that kind of stuff. But some of the new Nanlites especially, I'm definitely interested in trying some of those out.
Yeah, the one time this was a few years ago, but when I was finally introduced to wireless DMX, I was like, why can't we do this with everything? And then Aperture was like, well, you can. Yeah, you don't own any Aperture. Like, I own those MCs, but like, thank God you guys exist. Yeah, I just want more lights to have the XY coordinates. Because again, if you have a color meter, right, like on the Kinos, like if corporate interview, whatever. Or I keep saying corporate interview, but this applies to any time you're trying to match a light. Like if your character is sitting in an environment and you're modifying existing lights, or even you're on a stage and you've got a film light that you're using, like a M18, whatever the hell, you just meter it, get the XY, plug it into the Kino, and it gives you the exact same light. And it's just so valuable and saves so much time.
No, totally. There was just one light that was just announced that has that sort of XY. I can't remember which it was. Was it one of the new NAM lights that was just announced like last month? I'll have to look that one up. But I think there is one where you can sort of just change either sort of the magenta or green shift or anything like that. Just enough to match something else. So
yeah, that's the other one is without that system, kind of like crossing your eyes and fudging them so you can see 2 lights and like adjust the edge and be like, that seems close. Okay, moving on.
That's close enough. Yeah. That's great.
Were you in Utah for Sundance?
I was. Yep. So our latest film premiered at Sundance, and so we premiered on this past Mondays, but we got there on Thursday. So yeah, we were there for about 10 days.
Jeez, how I've yet to go to it. How was that experience for you?
It was fun. You know, I've never been actually. my wife, who's the director of the film that we worked on, she's been once before, but this is the first time we've had a film at Sundance. And so it was just an awesome experience. I mean, I know they've been online the last 2 years, so this is the first in-person Sundance in 3 years. And so you can just kind of tell everyone's jazzed to like be together watching movies and, have theaters full. And it's just cool to go to a film festival where, you have 5 screenings and, 2 or 3 of them are sold out, and they're just also really well attended, and you go to other premieres, and there's a lot of people in the audience, right? You never like go to a screening, no matter what time of day or what category it's in, where there isn't somebody, a pretty good amount of people in the audience, excited to watch that film. So to be in that environment, just movie lovers and artists, is just really, really exciting.
Yeah. I was in Colorado for December and January, and we were getting dumped on left, right, and center. Was it pretty? Do you ski at all? Were you able to kind of hit up for a second?
I ski a little bit, but I did not get on the slopes at all, which was a bummer because nobody was on them. I guess Sundance week is like the time to ski because like the skiers don't come, so like it's can be crazy because all the Sundancers and then the Sundancers don't ski. So it would have been a perfect time, but oh man, it snowed. You'd wake up and there'd be 6 more inches on the ground every day. Like you could sweep off your porch and then wake up the next morning and there's 6 more inches, just the softest powder I've ever seen in my life. So would have been nice to ski, but that didn't make it on the slopes, unfortunately.
I do eventually want to go to something like that because I can only imagine the sort of creative energy that you get from being around. Like Adobe's got a cool event called Adobe Max that's mostly aimed at designers and photographers and whatnot, but there is like a little bit of Premiere in there, but that's definitely not cinematography at all. But even going there to cover it for ProVideo Coalition, like I get jazzed just by being around other, creatives and stuff like that. I can't imagine that something like Sundance was leaving there just being like, I gotta go make stuff.
Yeah, no, totally, it does. It's like as you leave, like, man, we just released this film, we just premiered it. It's got a long road of film festivals and finding a distributor and all that ahead of it. But I'm just like, oh man, I can't wait to go out and like make something else. And to just because it's just like having that audience is just so special. We've made a couple films that have done well in the past, but when they go almost straight to streaming platforms or have a very short festival run and straight to the streaming platform, you don't really have that, right? Like you can look online and look at reviews and, see people say nice things on Twitter, but that's just completely different than having 300 people sit in your audience and watch your film right for the first time. Like there is no substitute for just a really great theater experience. And then actually one thing that at Sundance was, I talked to the Canon reps there for about an hour and a half about, because I used Canon cameras on the film that we just shot. Just talking about them about the cameras and the design and kind of what I was hoping to see in future models. So, just having kind of being from Knoxville, Tennessee, it's not like LA or New York where you can go down to rental shops or, big stores and actually see all the new stuff. So it's like, oh, it's just nice to see like all the new lenses.
Burbank.
Yeah, exactly. There's a whole new showroom and, so that was a lot of fun as well. It's just, having that energy and sort of the tech side of it, present at Sundance as well.
Yeah. That brings up 2 questions in my head. I guess I'll go with the tech one first. I have a C500 Mark II, and love it, but I have some thoughts. What would you like to see in a potential revision? What did you shoot? 500 or 300?
We used the 300 Mark III and then the C70.
C70 is so good. The value proposition on the C70 is nuts.
It is nuts. And they just keep updating the firmware over and over again to, add RAW on SD cards, which is amazing. And then, they got new autofocus, a new infra-frame codec they just released that has a smaller bit rate, like just a lot of stuff that, especially for owner operators, is just so nice. But yeah, we use the C300 and the C70 mostly because, they have the same exact sensor. They have mostly the same codecs, at least the ones we shot in, which was, the 4K 10-bit 422. and either obviously wildly different cameras, right? So you can use them in different scenarios. So whether it was, the C70 obviously can fly on a gimbal very easy, or if you need to hike into the woods for a while, it's easier to throw in a backpack and take it with you. So, those are the two cameras we used. And then I love the C70. I think my big sort of designing switch would be, it's already sort of a small box. I'm just kind of looking over here because I'm looking at it, but it's already sort of a small box. But I would almost like, this back screen is kind of in a weird position for a cinema camera, right? It's like it's trying to be like a DSLR, and it's a little too big for that. You can't really hold it out in front of you for that long of a time. And so I would just close off that back, throw a V mount on it, and then almost make it like a box and stick the screen off the handle, like the C300. But other than that, that I think that thing is pretty amazing for the size and the price and what it can do.
The funny thing about this, so I think that the C500 and the C300, Mark II, Mark III, are like basically perfect cameras. And I keep saying like, man, I wish the C70 just had like an SDI port. And then I'm like, well, if it's like that and one other thing, now it's just a C300.
Yeah, that's true. I think it's pretty much all. It's pretty much all it's missing is an SDI port, more or less. I guess
and the screen,
the higher bit rate RAW, and the nicer screen too. But I don't know. The C70 with like a full frame sensor on that would be awesome. I would love that. But I'm also not crazy about the full frame craze. I only say that because all the lenses they make for these cinema cameras now are full frame lenses. So it'd be nice to actually use the focal lengths that they give you rather than sort of a slightly altered version of that. But agreed. I think the C300 and C500 as well. I haven't used it too much, but thinking about snagging that for a feature I'm shooting in April. So hoping to do potentially a little anamorphic work on that. And the C70 and C500
with it
couldn't pull it off. Yeah.
Yeah. The anamorphic on full frame looks really nice. And in 6K, I did like a little, what do you call it? Not a demo. What do you call it when you make a spot for free for yourself? Spec.
Oh, I did
on spec. I did a spec ad, and we used the Atlas anamorphics on the C500, and that just
nice.
It's insane. Even for such like
the Orion set.
Yeah, the Silver series. They let me borrow the Silvers. I actually got to see the Mercuries because I'm like kind of friends with Dan Keynes. He was the guy who made Atlas.
Oh, cool.
Was actually on the podcast 2 years ago. So we were at NAB and he was like, hey, come here. And he like took us into this like secret room that they had at NAB and showed us the new Mercuries, which were like that big and flared.
Oh, amazing. I do have two pre-orders in for the 42 and the 72. They have kind of strange focal lengths, like a 36, a 42, and is it a 70, 75, something like that.
Something like that.
Yeah, so I'm hoping to use those on the feature I'm shooting, but if not, maybe I'll snag some Orions. But the Orions cover the C500.
Some of them.
Yeah.
Okay. It's really the thing with the full frame. So I wouldn't say I was poo-pooing full frame, but let me be delicate. I don't by any stretch think full frame matters, quote unquote.
Right.
I fully, Alexis Super 35, the new Alexis Super 35, C300 Mark III Super 35. But the added flexibility of full frame is nice. And also, I did a test between the 500 and the 300. And while the 300 has a lower noise floor, because of the added physical real estate of the larger sensor, the noise is smaller. So when you ratchet up the ISO, it's more easily corrected out. It looks more like film grain on the 500 than the 300.
Okay.
And so I found that to be, I don't know if that's worth $5,000. But it's certainly like if you're holding the two, objectively looking at the footage, you're like, I can do more. The image looks sharper, and you can do more with it when you crank the ISO on the 500. Plus, obviously, the anamorphic looks nice and stuff. But and then also you can, if you're shooting primes, just throw it down to Super 35 mode, and now you got twist or whatever you want to call.
Totally. I mean, that is a huge help, especially in dock stuff. I mean, the beauty of, a full frame sensor is that everyone makes a 24-70 2.8, right? And like that is such a useful lens in documentary. Like as much as we all would love to like shoot on beautiful primes and cinema primes, a lot of situations just, it's better to get the shot at 90% of the quality than kind of miss the shot at 100% quality, right? And so, on a Super 35, that suddenly like becomes not quite wide enough, right? And so that's why sort of having a full frame option is just so nice on dock stuff. To the point where like I've used like a Panasonic SYH on quite a few stuff just because it's just so nice to have that range with a full frame sensor. And, a 2.8, you can still, kind of get that subject separation that you would get with a faster prime, where obviously on a Super 35 it just becomes a little bit more difficult, but still obviously very possible.
Yeah. But what I was going to say about the coverage thing is like I found that pretty much every quote unquote Super 35 lens above 20 millimeters pretty much covers. Yeah, like my
Nice.
Sigma
That's good
18
to
to
know.
35, I can use from 20 to 35. I've got all these Tokina cinema zooms here that all cover, for the most part, the full like range from like 11 to 135, I think. The Orions were weird because there was like one in the middle that didn't cover, but everything else did. Like the wides covered,
interesting.
and then there was like a 24 or something that didn't, and then I used their 21. That thing was weird, dude.
I bet that's
21
wild.
on full frame. Look, I mean, I could practically see my shoulders. Like,
Yeah. I know, I've seen some footage of that. And I'm just like, man, I can't think of anything I'd shoot where I would use that, but I kind of want to figure something out.
well, the spec we shot, we were shooting in a bathroom, so I was sitting on the
nice.
sink and looking at someone's face. Actually, two people's faces because we could stage them. And it worked great for that.
Amazing.
But
Yeah, it's just, the anamorphic world's so crazy. It's just like so much new stuff has come out in the last couple of years that's, it's hard to tell kind of, there's a few on the cheaper side that I don't think I would use for anything, that I really, really, really cared about. But even Laowa, I've always loved Laowa lenses. The Laowa, yeah, I think so.
one of those, yeah.
Yeah, one of those. Those new, like, they have the new Proteus anamorphics that look pretty sweet. They're kind of in that same price ballpark as the Mercuries. Obviously quite a bit cheaper than the Orions at 2x squeeze. So it's a pretty, there's a lot going on. And even the tests I've seen from the 1.33 Viltroxes look beautiful. And they're kind of that sweet spot. I kind of always go back and forth. I know like the Deacons of the world are just like, only use spherical lenses and not anamorphics, right? And I'm like, oh, no, I can actually like kind of the vintage look or the anamorphic look. But then every time I'm using them, I'm like, ooh, I wish this was more like clinical, which is weird. So I can't decide if I am, that person who might be in the Deacons camp. Where I was like, I just want my image to not be drawing attention to itself too much, right? I want it to just focus on whatever it is that I'm shooting. And those Viltroxes are sort of like, they have a little bit of the anamorphicness to them, but they're really subtle, and like it still kind of has a sort of just a beautiful sharpness that I did not expect from such an anamorphic lens that's full frame and under $3,000. So I want to try them out, but they're hard to find.
I had to come to terms with the fact that sometimes I am a basic bitch and I do just like fudgy anamorphics. Like I've got the Anamorphics adapter from Lettuce 35, and yeah, you put the cool thing. So I got I don't have it built out right now, but on my C500 I got the 40 millimeter Canon Pancake, and then that Anamorphics adapter. So it's this small setup, right? It's only that big, but I have autofocus anamorphic. So
okay,
right, which is kind of cool. But the adapter's not like optically amazing, so it really does fudge everything up. But I'm like, that looks cool. Like I like it.
Totally. I mean, so in the film that we just premiered at Sundance, King Cole, there's sort of a magical realism side, right? It's kind of part documentary, part fable. And for that magical realism side, we wanted the image to look different than everything else, right? Like a lot of the film is sort of in a world that is very sort of observational. Like, this is how things are. This is how things have been for 40 years, right? So everything in that world is locked down. It's on sort of perfect spherical lenses, right? Sharp corner to corner. It's just like, here's the world as you see it. And we just sort of let people move throughout the frame, but we ourselves are just observers. And then sort of the other side of the film is sort of the magical realism elements that is imagining what could be, right? So the film's about the region of Appalachia and Central Appalachia and coal country. And so we're sort of imagining, like, who are we beyond coal, right? Who are we as a community, as a region, when the king is no longer around. And so for those scenes and that section, we wanted something that had, a little bit of a magical feel to it. So I tested a bunch of vintage lenses, kind of the usual suspects. Like I love that old Contax Zeiss, 50 millimeter 1.4, or the Hollywood, the f2.28. And I've used those in a bunch of projects in the past. And then of course the Helios 44. But actually,
see, that one's too much for me. I like it, I love it, but I would never use it.
Yeah, no, exactly. I did it. I was like, I bought it and that thing's sitting on my shelf. It was $40, but it's been sitting on my shelf for about 6 years, and using it fun, just for fun things. But we ended up landing on a Voigtlander Heliar Classic, which is a really new lens.
Okay,
it only came out like 2 years ago.
They make nice lenses.
They make really nice lenses, but this one is strange because they specifically made it to sort of be a modern Helios, I think. And so it has sort of this really interesting, like, bubbly bokeh, but it's not overwhelming. But then it doesn't have all the sort of, problems that a lot of vintage lenses do, right? Whether it's chromatic aberration or just really hazy, or it gets, blown out, or washed out. And so it's just like, it's just a beautiful, beautiful lens that just adds this sort of kind of weird magicalness to it, but still, like, it's sharp, and especially in the middle, just sharp and pretty, and just kind of renders a really, really cool images. So it's always fun kind of testing different lenses like that.
Yeah, that makes me think of a few questions, but and then there's that one from before. I'll remember them all. I'm 3 years of podcast. I'm good at remembering. Man, that first year was a lot of "I'll show me." On top of the lens choice for the sort of magical realism sections, were you doing anything with the lighting or any kind of production design or anything like that, or were you just kind of still trying to stay within that more naturalistic look?
Mm-hmm. Well, since most of the magical realism elements they're all outdoors, I think almost 100%. Hold on, I'm playing the movie back in my mind. But yeah, so most of them are all outside, and so we were working with a lot of natural light. And as all the cinematographers know, kind of listening to this podcast, is great cinematography is kind of first and foremost great light, right? And then it's production design, right? Or just location, right? If you're in a really, really nice location, it's generally easier to get pretty images. I did my travel doc series in Iceland for 3 weeks one time. And I was like, man, the sun just hangs so low along the horizon that it's impossible to not get a pretty image. Right? The light's always soft, it's always good, and you just need to figure out, where to position yourself with your subject to maximize that. And so that's kind of what we really focused on. Is like, I'm from West Virginia, my wife's from West Virginia. We spent most of our lives in Appalachia, Tennessee, Virginia, Kentucky. And so we just knew sort of all these different locations. And if we didn't, we'd ask, our friends or, our associate producer who lives in West Virginia, like, where can we get something like this, right? Where can we get a forest that is just all moss on the ground and big pines and all these things? And so it was really about, finding great locations to sort of heighten the magical realism elements, along with the lensing, along with, the camera movements, and along with all the other different things that, make a great image and sort of evoke that feeling.
Sound design, I imagine.
Oh man, this film. So our post sound supervisor was Alex Furman, who was the post supervisor, or did some of the sound. I'm not sure if she was officially the post supervisor, but she was one of the sound designers on Everything Everywhere All at Once. Yeah, which is maybe the best sound design movie of the last decade. So yeah, man, we went all out on the sound design for this film. It's just a completely sort of a transportive experience, and that's why it's so cool to have people watch it in theaters. Like, we wanted to make it visually like grander and bigger than anything we've done before. We want it to just sound like you just want to be enveloped by this film. And one person, commented, or a couple of people commented, like, that was more of an experience than a film. And we're like,
amazing.
That's exactly kind of what we were looking for, is like, it's just went to experience, 80 minutes of this place and this story.
Yeah. I actually interviewed Larkin Seipel for the podcast, the DP of Everything Everywhere All at Once. But it's funny because I interviewed him before the movie had come out, and I got to see it early. And so he and I were just kind of chatting like, well, hopefully people like it. We'll see what it does.
And if it like $70 million comes out of one of the biggest movies of the year.
Well, and every EP I've talked to since has brought it up at least once. So it's like, man, I got to get him back on, and hopefully he'll come back on.
Oh, you totally should. Yeah. That movie's so good. I love it.
11 Academy Awards casual.
Yeah, no big deal.
I did want to ask, because you had mentioned about what's Appalachia going to do when coal leaves. I was wondering, is coal kind of but is coal the main factor of keeping that community locked in place culturally? Because it does, even from that little like trailer you showed me, that the football team is tapping a lump of coal and stuff. Like, it's odd to me that an energy resource is so central to the identity of an area.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And the identity really, I think, comes from sort of two factors. The first big one is it's jobs, right? So it's how people make a living. And it's a tough place to live, especially where most of the coal is extracted, is like you are sort of deep in the hollers and deep in the mountains. And so if you weren't going there to mine coal, there's just no reason for humans to go there, right? Like it was hunting ground for the Native Americans before we arrived, and so as Europeans and people who were trying to extract coal, and so it's not a place that's easy to like build towns and build cities. It's just even to this day, a lot of the main coal towns that were sort of some of the richest towns in the East Coast in the 30s and 40s don't have highways to them, just because it's too difficult and too expensive to do. And so as the coal industry sort of bottoms out, I think, back at its peak in the 40s, 140,000 people worked in the coal industry in West Virginia. Now it's 12,000. I mean, it's 90% of the jobs have evaporated for lots of factors, mostly automation, right? You use machines to do the jobs that lots of people used to do. But the sort of political side and the cultural side of coal is still sort of the main pride of the region, of the area. And I think that's the hardest thing to move past is, once you become defined as this one thing, right? Like Appalachia value is totally wrapped up in how much coal can you provide for the rest of the nation, right? It's, it was used to fight wars. It was used to build the cities. It was used to make steel. It was, all these things that people found a lot of pride in, as they should, right? It's, and then as it's sort of the public opinion on coal has turned, right? I think a lot of people in the region feel a little slighted, right? It's like, we did this extremely dangerous and tough job. That's, I mean, honestly, it's just you're underground for 10 or 12 hours a day, right? It's not like a job that other than the fact that it pays really, really well, especially for Appalachia, it's no job that any human really wants or should partake in, right? It's just not how we're meant to live underground. So I think that has sort of contributed to the cultural hold of coal, right? It's like it's a community thing. A lot of people talk about it as a brotherhood, as something that's dangerous. It's had a very sort of almost similar terms of like the military, whereas because it's so difficult, because it's sort of almost looked down upon in a lot of ways, it actually bonds people together. And then that's sort of obviously seeped into the politics. It's seeped into different areas of the community. And at the same time, there's this other side of Appalachia that is, about storytellers and music and all these different, art forms. Some of the greatest musicians are just people you've never heard of sitting on their porch playing amazing, banjo and fiddle and guitar and all those different instruments. So, it's sort of this weird dichotomy between the two, right? And I think there's some tension, at least it seems like it from a outsider standpoint, but ultimately it's the same place and the same people and sort of the same individualistic and self-reliance nature of the people who live there and grew up there and have been there a very, very long time.
Yeah, I always wonder when stuff like that happens to where, like, in this case, automation taking over the majority of the jobs. I guess, in my opinion, my personal opinion, in a just society, automation frees up people to pursue more human things. We were not born to work. We were born to create. Mm-hmm. I think isn't necessarily a controversial stance, but instead automation either makes people destitute or makes people work even harder. I like the one phrase I've heard a lot is like, if a factory makes 100 pins an hour with 20 people and they get a machine that makes 200 pins an hour, they just make those people sit around. Instead of taking half the day off, they're there the whole day and they now run surplus of pins. Yep. Because we're so tied, at least in this country, but certainly many Western countries, to the idea of the work being who you are. Mm-hmm. I know plenty of people who, and especially older generations, you're about my age. I'm sure you've heard like, you got to be loyal to your company because they're going to take care of you and we know better now. Yeah. But
that may have been a truth. I think for my father, it definitely was. For my wife's father, it was. But I think what's kind of interesting about it is the automation actually does, it does provide, I think if I forget the exact term you use, but it does provide a sort of an easier life or more chances for humans to create rather than work, right? It's just not the people who were doing the work before, right? It's like the automation sort of obviously eliminates those jobs, right? If we're talking about coal mining, whether it's, the automation of mining coal is like it takes those jobs and it's not those people necessarily who are now have the free time to create. And so that's sort of the unjust nature, right? It's to some degree,
they're not getting paid to create.
Right. At some degree, like, if you look at my wife, right, her father was a coal miner, her grandpa was a coal miner, her great grandpa was a coal miner, right? And because they did those jobs, but now through automation, like, look, there's not as many of those jobs. There obviously are women in the mines, not a ton, but instead she's a filmmaker, right? She's the one who's sort of benefiting from the sort of struggles of the past generations. And so I think that's the tough part, right? Is the automation obviously creates generally wealth on a larger scale, right? Of whether it's on the coasts and the cities or for creators in different locations, but it doesn't necessarily happen for the people in the community that lost their jobs. And Appalachia is a great example of that. There's a line in our film that I think it was in the 1960s. West Virginia was the 12th richest country in terms of just wealth created in the country, but it's been 49th or 50th in terms of actual on the ground living conditions, because all the wealth that the state created went other places, right? It went out of state, it went to other people, and so I think that's it's tough to see people sort of hold on to that when it's like, no, we can be something else, but we have to let go of this past, right? We have to let go of this identity that we're nothing without coal, because we can be other things, but we have to imagine what that could be in order to move past or move on.
Yeah. I mean, the creative in me kind of goes like, and I'm an idiot, but like, you can romanticize that history. It's a relatively, I don't know everything, but it from my limited knowledge, it is a relatively unproblematic thing that you could celebrate about your culture's, your area's history, as opposed to, slavery. And you can romanticize that and be really cool about it and move on. You don't have to be a part of, like, lineages don't go forever for a reason. Otherwise, some people might be against certain levels of progress, but no progress is stagnation. And I don't think stagnation has a good definition anywhere.
Yeah. No, totally. And I think that's really what we're trying to get across in the film is like we can be proud of this and still want better for the future. And I think it's kind of it's definitely the most fun film I've ever been a part of because visuals were so important in telling that story, right? Like I've shot quite a few documentaries where it's just like, just get the shot, just get the story, make sure you don't miss it, and if, you can't do it, then someone else will find someone else who can, right? More or less. Where this just felt so much like, especially for Elaine, she was the only person who could make this specific film, which is pretty exciting. And then I kind of in turn feel like I was one of the only few people who could shoot this film and shoot it in the way that we did. And so that made it a lot of fun because that's the kind of story we want to tell, right? Is you can be sort of proud of your past and still move on. And then you look at some places that are, tied to coal country, like the Rust Belt, right? Like the steel country is like they have sort of, look, Pittsburgh is like a great example of a city that, had that giant fallout in the 70s and 80s and had to come to terms with the fact like we need to be something else. And now, Pittsburgh's growing and it's unbelievable and it's got tech and healthcare and all and universities and all these different things that they've really sort of leaned on and been able to move past. But again, that all comes back to exactly, Sidney Crosby and sweet hockey. But sometimes it comes back to geography. It's a town that's right on a giant river and has a lot going for it in that way. Whereas in Central Appalachia, it's so difficult to get in and out of. It's hard to sort of be reborn in a place that people can't visit or people can't find or have no reason to in a lot of ways, other than just come visit for its beauty because it's an unbelievably beautiful place.
Yeah. Well, and the thing that I'm kind of stoked for you guys about is it does seem like it's not a downer of a doc. I could see how easily this could be like this could be a sadness doc. Mm-hmm. And it seems very joyful in a way, which is cool.
100%. Yeah, actually at Sundance, we came out of a few screens and we're just like, how nice is it that like we made a film that's hopeful and that people are like smiling as they leave, right? I mean, the previous two big films that my wife and I made together were both about the opioid crisis. And though they were films about people who are trying to help and make change, it's still, just such a heavy topic. And that takes a toll on you for doing that for 3 years as a filmmaker. But also it's, you're showing it to audiences because it's important and you want people to sort of connect to the characters that you filmed. But at the same time, having a film that is joyful in a lot of ways and like is about hope and imagination and about the future, is a lot of fun. A lot of fun.
Yeah. The is perfect lineage to that earlier question I was going to ask, and then I'll let you get out of here in a couple more questions. But I know that going to festivals, I don't think a lot of people know this if they're just getting into filmmaking, but like going to festivals is where your stuff gets picked up. It's not promoting it online. It's not having a big Twitter or Instagram following. It's literally showing at any festival, let alone Sundance. And so I'm wondering, with your experience, because you actually have won some, or at least been nominated for some pretty intense awards. The Academy Award, if I'm not mistaken, at least one.
Nominated for an Academy Award, and then I've won 2 Emmys, which is pretty exciting.
There you fucking go, bud.
Yeah.
But what is the sort of, I suppose for lack of a better term, networking experience at a Sundance versus Ojai Film Festival, whatever, just like one of these kind of smaller ones that are still incredibly valuable to go to. I think my buddy's doc, who got picked up by MSNBC, nominated for an Emmy. I think it got seen at, I think it was Ojai. Like it was one of those small, Santa Barbara, something like that, where those opportunities are still there. But I imagine Sundance is a different level of person walking up to you.
Yep. Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I think that's one of the cooler things of at Sundance is, had our 3rd or 4th screening, probably one of the smaller theaters. It was like 8:30 in the morning. I was like, okay, this is probably going to be our least well-attended screening. And it was, but it was, still maybe 3/4 full in a small theater. But afterward, a couple people from Zeiss walked up to me and said, wow, that was really pretty. And I'm glad you used Zeiss CP3s on, some of your film. And I was like, oh, sweet. So it's just like, people like that, right? Like the Canon reps are there, the Zeiss reps are there. And then obviously just the amount of filmmakers that are there who have a chance to see your film. There's filmmakers who I incredibly admire and love their work in the doc space that were at our screenings, and just being able to connect with them and watch their films. And it's just, I don't think you can beat that type of networking, if you will, right? It's like now there's 8, 9, 10 directors who had films at Sundance who have seen my work on the big screen, right? You can't, there's no substitute for that. So I think that alone is exciting. And then I think at the same time, like any other film festival has that same possibility, right? It's like, it's, at Sundance, obviously it's Sundance filmmakers, but if it's Atlanta or Cleveland or Nashville, it's like, it's still filmmakers who are making great work. I've made films that have gone 0 for 40 on the Sundance or on the film festival circuit, right? It's like 40 rejections on Film Freeway or something. So like, I know that it's not easy to get into any specific film festival. And so I think every film festival is a chance to, meet people and potentially collaborate with folks and find other people that, you can get your work out to. So, but yeah, Sundance is definitely kind of one of those next levels.
Yeah. That was a hard kind of lesson to learn when I was a bit younger, of like, all this effort I put into like, well, I shouldn't even say I put effort into it, but me and a bunch of my friends all had the same, kind of like late millennial idea that like, oh, you'll be seen. And it's like, no, it's still film festivals. I went to a producing class when I was very young. And the guy was like telling us about, I don't know if they do this anymore, but basically these distributors would like rent out hotels and they would clear out all the beds out of all the rooms. And then you would just go from like room to room showing your short or whatever, and then they'd buy it or not. And it was like a whole fish market for like film.
Speed dating, for films.
Yeah, for distributors. And I guess they don't do that anymore. But in my head, I was like, oh, that's old. We don't do that. We're on the internet now. And it's like, nope, festivals, keep doing them.
Yeah, keep doing them. It's true. I mean, the internet, it's like where content goes to die in a lot of ways. So
yeah,
that's
not this podcast.
Not this podcast.
No, this one lives.
This one lives on.
Yeah. I've had a lot of fun. We're a little over, so I'll let you go. But I end the podcast with the same 3 questions.
Gotcha.
So the first one, and this is, I'm starting here because I've learned that this one invokes a long pause. A lot of people ask what the best piece of advice they ever got was, and I found the answer is always like, stick to it. So I want to know what the worst advice you ever got was.
Ooh, that's a good question. Well, it wasn't actually advice I received, but I was in the same car of someone else giving it. So I'll do that. I was working on I won't name what, because then if that person listens, they might figure out it was them. But I was working on a show. I've only ever AC'd one show in my life, and it was this show. The DPs, they were great. Then there were some PAs, and one of the PAs asked, like, "Oh, I want to be a DP. Like, how do I become, a DP? How do I get to do what you all do?" And the DP, a generation, half generation, above me, kind of went through the very standards, like, oh, try to get like a job at a rental house and work there for 4 or 5 years, like learn all the equipment, and then, try to become an AC on smaller level things, and then, work your way up through the ladder. And well, I think that's great advice. And I think everyone just gives the advice of whatever they did, right? Like that's general advice. I was like, this was like 6 years after I picked up a camera, just had finished 2 Netflix films as the DP and was working on another. So I'm kind of like listening to this, like, man, that's like 10, 12 years of work to get to like, this point where, and not even probably where that person who's giving the advice is now, right? That's probably 20 or 25 years down the lane. So I would say, there's the old models of sort of working your way up through the system. And then there is the new way of teaching yourself and just figuring it out, right? And just doing your own thing, right? There's no substitute to making your own work, because it's the only thing you specifically can uniquely do. And so I would just say, if you're trying to be a great DP, just shoot, and make as much work and complete the work, right? Just shooting isn't enough. You have to actually have completed work, right? Like all the pretty shots that I really, really love in King Cole are nothing without the completed film in a story, that tells a story and actually functions as a film. So I would say, that was probably the worst advice I've heard given was, sort of basically work your way up the corporate ladder of the film industry for 25 years, and then maybe you can be a DP. Where I'd be like, no, just grab a camera and start shooting.
When your back's blown out, that's when you can finally pick one up.
Exactly.
Second question. You are programming a double feature with King Cole. What's the other film?
Ooh, someone actually said this the other day.
Someone stole my idea.
But someone stole your idea, actually. But I've not seen the film. But they said you should screen with this one. It was our colorist actually a few weeks ago. They made a film about diamonds, I believe, in Africa, and there's similar themes. But I would say I would probably choose Bombay Beach by Amma Harrell. I love that movie. It had a sort of a similar kind of just whimsiness to it. I mean, King Cole might be a little more serious, but Bombay Beach has a little bit of that sort of heaviness mixed with reality, mixed with magical realism, mixed with whimsy. And so I think that'd be a pretty nice pairing, and very different parts of the country, right? One's in the deserts of, I believe, California, but it'd be in somewhere else in the Southwest, and then obviously Central Appalachia, very opposite of the desert. And so, yeah, I think that'd be a pretty good pairing.
That's a great one.
And they're both not super long, not like 3-hour movies back to back. It's like
we love a 90-minute film.
Oh, hey, we're at 78 minutes. Perfect. They're like, oh man, 78 minutes. Perfect for a documentary.
That's lovely.
That's awesome.
I was like 2 nights ago. I was like, you know what? I didn't give Batman. What was the last Batman movie? Not the Batman, but Dark Knight Returns or whatever.
Yeah,
Dark Knight Rises.
Yeah,
I was like, I didn't give that one a fair shake because everyone said it's their favorite now, and I'm like, all right, I'll watch this again. And I turn it on, and the little like progress bar pops up, and it says like 2:41, and I went, oh come on,
like, nope, I'm out.
Damn it,
never mind.
I started this.
Oh, wait, what are they? People are saying that's the best one in retrospect. I need to go and rewatch that then, because obviously it's the Dark Knight.
Right. I will say now, having rewatched it, I get why people say that now, because having distance from just the absolute white hot fervor of the Dark Knight makes Dark Knight Rises better. Like you just watch it for what it is versus not being the Joker. Not being
perfect. Okay. Yep. All right. Yeah. Maybe I'll watch that tonight.
To give it 3 hours.
Yeah. Yeah. That's true.
And Michael Caine obviously just fucking destroys you by the end of it. So it's good. Everyone's good.
Oh yeah.
But okay, so final question. I asked this one of all the documentarians. What is your shoe recommendation?
Shoe recommendation?
Because all the documentarians be standing all day.
This is actually funny because my wife always says, "Don't ask Curren about shoes."
Yes.
So I'm one of those hardcore minimalist guys. Actually, I'm pretty anti-shoe in general. So anything with padding, I feel like just does more damage than it helps. So I'm a Vivo barefoot or zero shoes guy.
There you go.
But to be fair, if I'm doing something specific like gimbal work or something that needs a little bit of padding, I'll get something with a little extra. But I haven't quite found it yet. But I would say probably the thing I wear most often are Go Ruck boots, because they still have not too much padding, and they don't have they're not zero drop from back to front, but they're fairly close. So but yeah, don't get me on the shoes and the evils of shoes.
Well, you also look like you go too, so that'll work for you.
Yeah, if people let me go barefoot, I would.
Fair enough. I mean, most people are like Blundstones or Hokas, but recently I've started to get new answers. Some Adidas over here and someone named weird. So we'll just the conceit is by the end of this season, I'm going to create a list of all the shoes that have been suggested and just host them online.
Most cameras used and most shoes worn. Yeah. Well, you can probably tack one for minimalist shoes or barefoot, which is where I'll be. I'm the anti-Hoka.
Yeah. We'll just put an asterisk and it's just him.
It's just this guy, yeah.
Well, thanks so much for spending the time with me, man. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah,
and congrats on the film and
thank you so much.
Success. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Frame and Reference is an Owlbot production.
It's produced and edited by me, Kenny McMillan, and distributed by ProVideo Coalition. Our theme song is written and performed by Mark Pelly, and the F at our Mapbox logo was designed by Nate Truax of Truax Branding Company. You can read or watch the podcast you've just heard by going to provideocoalition.com or youtube.com/owlbot, respectively. And as always, thanks for listening.